Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Please welcome Chitra Nawbatt, author of the book, The CodeBreaker Mindset, The Unwritten Rules for Success, and today she found out that she is now a USA Today best-selling author. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Actually, it came out on Wednesday of this week because we're recording on a Friday, or we're live here on a Friday, but it came out Wednesday of this week. So the Codebreaker Mindset was released on April the 28th. So in its first week of release, an official bestseller. Number one, actually, in its category of business and economics, number one in self-help, and 14 overall. And above the books above my book are fiction, cooking, lifestyle, children's books, all the categories.
Well, congratulations. Gabby, feel so good about that. So before we talk about the book, why don't you tell us about your professional travels, how you got to where you're at right now?
Sure. Thank you for asking. And a good day again to everyone watching. So, not multiple chapters to my career. And it started, first generation to go to college and university, but coming through school, I knew I really enjoyed business. And so one of the foundations of business is the language of accounting. You can call me old fashioned. So I said, you know what, let me get the CPA, start at EY in audit and consulting, because it was a great professional background foundation, understanding the language of business, understanding numbers. My clients were financial services. So after my first chapter at EY, I went to investment banking, and for many years at Deutsche Bank doing M&A and then fintech for Deutsche Bank, creating a fintech platform before fintech was a thing. My third chapter was a very nonlinear career pivot, becoming a TV news anchor in New York City, the number one media market in the world, for large reputable platforms like Reuters, BNN, Bloomberg, CCTV, and others. My fourth chapter, I came off television and got recruited to a digital transformation consulting firm called Genpact. That was my fourth chapter. My fifth chapter is I joined a top tier venture capital firm, General Catalyst, and was a partner there, investing in enterprise, consumer, fintech, health tech, a lot of health tech work. And then after General Catalyst, I spent some time at a healthcare startup. Then I did some growth advisory work for a large tech company. Fast forward, also actually did a brief tour of duty for the advanced team of a former president of the United States, and that was part of Give Back. Here we are now, wrote the book, The Codebreaker Mindset, host of the Codebreaker Mindset podcast. And the reason why I did the book and the podcast is to serve others, and proceeds from the book go to cancer research. So
How
that's a bit of a
nice.
fast forward.
Wow. I mean, you lived like six different lives.
Multiple, and I'm really fortunate. And by the way, I forgot to mention, I was also previously an adjunct professor at Rutgers Business School, teaching management, accounting, entrepreneurship. And so through the journey, multiple lives, and really fortunate actually to get to do that, to create those opportunities, take advantage of those opportunities, others who believed in me. But I would say the throughput, or the through line, the consistent theme through all of that is serving other people, whoever my stakeholders were, whether it was clients, teammates, students, the public, the broader country community. Always a notion of business development and growth. And the third would be innovation, thought leadership, taking things to the next level.
Well, I am excited to interview you this evening. Day for you, evening for me in Hanoi. So
Yes.
let's start off with chapter one, chaos and then is the new norm. And I think we've been experiencing that for the past 2 years since the election. You write that we now live in a world where chaos is the norm. What was the moment in your own life when you realized chaos wasn't temporary, it was structural?
Because in every company I've worked, in every industry I've worked, it can feel like a constant roller coaster at times. And so, that moment was, EY, less of a roller coaster because that was one environment where it was way more about independence, objectivity, I would say relatively more merit. However, once I went into banking, CIBC and many years of Deutsche Bank, television, Genpact, General Catalyst, and beyond, each of those companies, each of the industries in which they occupy, noticing roller coaster. So whether it's macroeconomic, microeconomic pressure affecting the performance of those companies, affecting the clients and the stakeholders and the constituents that you're serving, internal dynamics, right? In terms of internal politics or measurement mechanisms or your opportunity to contribute, innovate, get rewarded for performance. So the macro and microcosm of the industry, the company, your team, unit context, and even on a personal note, things happening in one's personal life, whether it's death of loved ones, healthcare issue of loved ones, your own personal journeys of love lost, whatever the case may be, right? And so
Yeah.
noticing constant chaos. And by the way, when you think you've got partners or vendors who you think you can rely on, both in your personal life and your professional life, when they experience instability or they disappear on you. So constantly it's through those mechanisms.
Of the five agents of chaos you identify, which which one do you think is most underestimated by everyday people and why?
The scarcity of bandwidth. Because when you have scarcity of bandwidth, and by the way, we may not realize we have scarcity of bandwidth. You've got pressure in your personal life, your business life, your nonprofit life, your personal life, whatever aspect of your life. Maybe you're not, healthcare is not up to where it should be. You're not feeling so well. Your nutrition was off that day, week, month, or year. Your sleep is off that day, week, month, or year. You're not perhaps feeling the love or elements or people fueling and pouring into you. Whatever the dimension is from a mental perspective, emotional perspective, spiritual, holistic perspective, we may not be able to identify that degradation, erosion, negative impact to ourselves, either in the moment of that specific moment, the frequency, the severity of the headwinds we endure, and the life to date of what the erosion does to a person. And so, yep, you wake up every day, you bounce back muscle memory, but you may not be able to explicitly, conscious or subconsciously, recognize how much you're impaired. That level of impairment affects how you show up every day. Do you have patience? Do you have the creative juices to be a great individual contributor, leader, manager, innovator? Be empathetic, sympathetic to your neighbor, family, colleague, etc. So there is a compound effect on the positive side when you have good bandwidth, but there is a negative nonlinear compound effect when you don't have that bandwidth and impacts your thinking and extremely important, your judgment, your ability to see clearly, discern, and make effective decisions, which is the underpinning of so many things. And that effective decision could be, do you have that piece of chocolate cake or not? Not that there's anything wrong with a chocolate cake if you have a health issue, but whether you're eating well, whether you are saying the right thing to your family member or colleague, but that decision making underpins everything in your day. Do you exercise? Do you meditate? Do you show up to work on time? Do you go to that conference? Do you take that extra meeting? Do you take that Zoom call? It impacts every second of every day.
Well, I think your next career is being a motivational speaker. You got
We
so
take
much energy.
we take motivation from everything around us, but I think the energy, and thank you for pointing that out. I think for me the energy is a passion to help other people and a passion to see the like every single human has so much possibility, and I think the headwinds of life can beat it out of a person or beat that belief out of us. And so the opportunity is to see possibility in 8 billion beautiful people on the planet and how to help those people unlock that positive possibility and get the most out of their life, because we're here to get the most out of our lives, not to have headwinds or others put limitations on our lives.
Yeah, I tell my students every day, your job is to maximize your potential by giving your best effort every day, and everything else is out of your control. That's the only thing that you control is your effort. And
And I think
yep.
Yeah, and I think the critical thing about that is it's how you define your potential. And of course, if you have others who spot different kinds of potential in you, like I didn't know everything. I didn't know about all these industries and careers. It was others who pointed out positive attributes in me that I should develop, but also it's what you define as enriching and value in your life of what you want to contribute to yourself and the world before you come off the planet.
How does someone begin to cultivate calm in the hurricane you describe without becoming numb or detached from reality?
That calmness and developing calm, I think, involves three things. Number one, being able to block out the noise, listen to yourself, tap into your own intuition and informed intuition. And by the way, informed intuition is your raw intuition you're born with, plus your life to date pattern recognition. And that's one of the principles I talk about in the CodeBreaker Mindset. But blocking out the noise and listening to your own informed intuition. Number two, continuing on blocking out the noise, listening to your own value system. Does this align with your values, align with what you want to do, align with what you want to contribute, align with how you want to operate, how you want to be, how you want to feel? Do you want to be working in a pressure cooker every day? Some do, some don't, right? Some want to work in a pressure cooker sometimes, but not all the time. Do you want to have this kind of vibration with your stakeholders, this kind of energy, this kind of ability to communicate and dialogue or not? And the third element, and the biggest one actually, is this notion of substance versus form. And I learned this as a CPA. Lawyers also have this concept as well. The form shows up one way, but the substance is different. So getting to that place of calmness is being able to identify, does the substance match the form? Yes or no? If it doesn't, is it me or the other person or other situation? C, the gap, is it something I can problem solve for? Do I even want to? Right? And four, part of the conclusion of that then is, hey, you know what? The substance doesn't match the form. I don't feel alignment. How do I want to participate or not participate? Block out the noise, make a decision based on that clarity.
In chapter 2, you share powerful stories from your would you pronounce Guyanese heritage?
Guyanese, thank you. Guyana and Guyanese. Yep.
Yeah, Guyanese heritage and your family's history of resilience. How did those experiences most directly shape your code breaker philosophy?
My forefathers and definitely my parents, I watched them, Mark, work so hard. My mother started as a typist at the Bank of Nova Scotia in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, had a high school education. My father, high school education. And whilst he was a land surveyor in Guyana, when he went to Toronto, Canada, as a man of color at that time, it was very difficult for him to find work in his original profession from Guyana. And so he was blue collar, factory worker, working in factories where he was a union member, non-union member, day shift, night shift, midnight shift, double shifts. And so they instilled hard work, but keep your head down, high integrity, go beyond the call of duty. So that they instilled. And my mother and father, they got that from their parents and their grandparents. My father's father was an entrepreneur, which in Guyana at that time was a really big deal because he only had education to the age of 8. His father, before that, my great grandfather, was an indentured servant, not a free man, up until he was in his early 70s. And my forefathers are, came from some came from slavery and indentured servitude. So all of that just to say, the only way that they could progress forward was hard work, despite the headwinds, despite whatever the structures were, fair or unfair, depending on how you assess that. But through hard work, grit, they had no choice but to keep getting up every day and pushing through and not giving up. So it was observing that explicitly and implicitly around the family table or in visits with my father and mother back to Guyana, spending time with my grandfather, those scenarios.
You succeeded in six different industries, as I mentioned. You've had like six different lives. Which transition required the most code breaking and why?
I would say, probably three elements to that. Deutsche Bank required a lot of code breaking because I was relatively young and new in my career, and I didn't really understand a lot of the unwritten rules in corporations and the politics that people don't say what they mean, and the hinting or the EQ and reading the tea leaves. So that took a lot of code breaking. And that I would say that investment banking was my loss of professional innocence because up until that point, I thought the world was about merit, but it sure wasn't. So that was a different kind of code breaking because of my newness in my professional journey and it being so dramatic to learn the hard way, the painful way about the tremendous unwritten rules in the corporate world. From a share, number two, from a share force and nature breaking in perspective, it would be television news because they told me it was impossible to become a TV news anchor, or I was told this. And I was told that, especially in New York City, the number one media market in the world for reputable brands, forget about it. I was told that that was almost impossible. And so sheer force and nature, networking, going up and meeting strangers, pitching myself, elevator pitch, putting myself out there and doing the work to learn the craft and be as good at it as I could have been. That I would say that pivot into television was force and nature pivot. And the third would be when I was in venture capital. That's another industry where if I thought investment banking was a heavily veiled industry and environment, venture capital even more so because the stakes are so high. You're dealing with 100 million, billion-dollar investment decisions, 100 million, billion-dollar valuations, creating intergenerational wealth for people. So the order of magnitude of the risk and the reward is off the charts. Thus, the battleground of that industry being way more acute than any other industry that I've encountered, except for perhaps television, where it's extremely high stakes as well.
How do you use AI as a code breaker? Like, how do you leverage that when you want to think about ideas or maybe how you're going to approach something new? How are you leveraging AI?
Artificial intelligence so far is yet to give me a net new idea. That's not what it does for me based on my 6+ industries, different geographies, my pattern recognition, and all the beautiful people and stakeholders I've had the fortune to work with, interview, collaborate, etc. So for me, thus far, AI hasn't given me a net new idea of what to create. However, what AI has done is disseminating large amounts of information, giving me analysis of that information as an input into my own critical thinking, into my own pattern recognition. And it's a great place to ask questions. Hey, how do I become a USA Today bestseller? And it'll give me some information, but that's not enough information to rely on. It's great as great in terms of giving you more of a head start and informed input for you to then further analyze, ask others questions. So it's great in terms of analysis and to some extent a certain level of triangulation, but it doesn't get to you octagonulation, which is one of the things I talk about in the Codebreaker Mindset, which is in this age of AI and tech and the rate and pace of change becoming more dynamic and faster, it's going to be our ability to octagonulate. Octagon is 8 sides, meaning it's as many sources of information and inputs as you can get to synthesize your analysis, and your decision making. That is a new competitive edge.
In chapter 3, you developed an entire equation for how people succeed. When did you first realize these elements, written rules, unwritten rules, pivots, serendipity, which I think is a big part of it, and informed intuition formed a pattern?
When I was in investment banking, and one of the things I mentioned earlier, which is I'd work hard, I'd deliver, be ahead of schedule, deliver to the perfection that the management teams were looking for. And I may not necessarily get that promotion. I was underleveled, underpaid, might not have been given opportunities, not because I didn't earn it from a merit perspective, but other politics, but also too, my EQ wasn't fully developed to understand the unwritten of what my colleagues and management was telling me. There was so much unwritten, right? I couldn't have been so eager and keen as I was. It was a very different environment than EY. EY, I was taught, put your hand up, do the job of your boss, and that's how you get promoted and move up. In investment banking, that wasn't the same measurement and positive performance mechanism. And so it was in investment banking where I learned for the very first time that there's a lot of unwritten rules of how one progresses or advances, and it's not tied to merit.
Many listeners will resonate with your statement that mediocrity rises faster than excellence. How should high performers navigate that reality? And I think there's a lot of people that you're a high performer try knocking you down, or they don't want you to be because it forces them, especially in big organizations, to put more effort in.
Every day, all day, in many instances, Mark, and many of us may experience this, right? It's the microaggression to the macroaggression, if you will. And I've used a strong word there, right? Microaggression to macroaggression, because that's what it is, right? And so when you think about it, the normal distribution, I think it's one of the greatest inventions of mankind, whether we believe in it or agree with it or not, right? But it is a model, it's a mental model for people to understand, all of us to understand. It was invented in the 1800s when the majority of planet Earth didn't know how to read and write. So it was an outlier, a double outlier, triple outlier of its time. But what is that normal distribution, right? Left tail below average, average, and the right tail. So the A player is the right tail. The average is the B player, and the left tail below average is the C player. So when you think about it, it's a model. The majority of the planet, the majority of companies, the majority of units, right? The majority of people are that B and C player because it's the average and the below average. That's the majority of that curve, that bell curve. It's the right tail A player. So what do? 3 things. The quickest thing is to identify what's the environment that I'm in, and am I an A, B, or C player in that context? Because just because I'm an A player in one context, I may not be an A player in all contexts, right? Macro and micro contexts. So accurately identifying and evaluating where you are. B, as part of that, what's the incentive and reward mechanism in that environment? Does it more reward A players and want A players to carry that bucket of water, if you will, and carry the team? Or as an A player, is the reward system such that you have to calibrate yourself in terms of your speed, your agility, your rate and pace of work and productivity to adjust and blend in more with the B and the C player. And C, ultimately, you have to decide, do I want to hang out in this sandbox where I may have to adjust myself more to performing and contributing at the B and C player? Or do I want to move myself to a different sandbox where the left tail is the A player, the average is the A plus player, meaning the excellent player, and the right tail is the A plus plus player, meaning the exceptional player. Because by the way, artificial intelligence has redefined and reinterpreted that normal distribution, because now the new baseline, if you want to succeed and win in the age of AI, is that good as the new average. In other words, the left tail is now the A player, right? The majority of companies out there haven't caught up to that, right? And so they're not innovating and performing at the rate and pace they should, because there's a tolerance for the B and the C player. Now, I don't say that from a place of negativity. So if you're the A player in management, you've got two opportunities. Upskill your people, the B and the C player, invest in them to upskill them and get them to a high performing level where the new baseline is the A player. And or identify that perhaps that B and C player are not in the places where they can be superstars, because everybody is an A player and superstar at something. The opportunity is to identify the context in which you can be that, because it's possible. I
A
recognize
question
there was a
from
lot of information there, so happy to dive in further.
No, it was good information. And we want to cover as much of your book as we possibly can. So we want people to read this book. I think it's actually a great book for college students to read because it gives them a long-term perspective about life. I think that's what this book really brings a lot of. Question from the audience. I have a question. What is the one skill I must master before stepping into investment banking?
Analytical skills, holistic analytical skills. And that is not only just about the IQ, so that's got to be solid, right? The reading, the math. Yes, of course, your use of AI and technology, but your critical investigative skills, in other words, that making sure that you are capturing and making decisions based on data versus perception and manipulation. And hopefully we'll talk about that later, because I talk about in the information is power chapter. You want to understand and discern between information versus data. You want to understand and discern between data versus perception and manipulation, so that your analytics and analysis from an IQ perspective is holistic. But the other part of your holistic analytics is the EQ, understanding the EQ of the environment, of your stakeholders, and that factoring into your analytics, the cultural quotient, the culture of the environment and your stakeholders, and synthesizing that together in terms of your holistic quotient and your holistic analytics. So it's not only just the hard productivity, it's the soft productivity, it's the holistic analytics.
Aren't people relying too much now on data? Like it's gone so far to one side that people aren't actually interacting with people to learn from them, that they're purely making decisions based off of data, and that's not always correct.
100%. Or not even they're making decisions off of data. They're making decisions off of perception or manipulation. Because what is manipulation driven information? It's fact and fiction concocted to drive a certain narrative and outcome. That is the majority of what we see on social media, the majority of what we see in news, even to some extent what you see in investor presentations by private or publicly traded companies, right? And so we're surrounded by manipulation, we're surrounded by perception. And therefore, it's not only just what you read, the bigger issue is the short form nature of the content. It is the skimming, scrolling emoji, short 1 to 2 liner that either credible news platforms put out or social media, or even if you're texting with a colleague. The other day, I had a text exchange with someone and I picked up the phone and I called them. Through that 5 or 10 minute conversation, by the way, which takes time, energy, bandwidth that many of us don't have, I uncovered a lot more. And I said to the person, I couldn't have understood that from the text. I couldn't have understood that from an emoji, right? But definitely the short form text, it does nowhere near the justice of giving the giver and receiver, the buyer seller of that text exchange enough insight and information into what's going on. And so it's old fashioned picking up the phone, talking to people, asking questions. What did you really mean by that, Mark? Is this what you mean? Oh, I think I understand. Oh, you know what? This is really what this lexicon or language means, because you assume the other person is coming in at the same rate of literacy at which your mind is thinking and how you're communicating in that short form excerpt. And oftentimes, the other person is not on the same frequency as you.
Yeah, I think that for sure that things are going so fast. I know with younger people, getting them to actually physically interview somebody because they're so used to researching everything online and taking everything online, that the idea of actually speaking to them is like a real foreign concept.
Because here's the other thing about it, Mark, and I've learned this in every single step of my journey, even in my process on this book process, right? Which is you ask the person, whether it's text, email, etc. You may say, "Hey, what do I need to get? What do I need to accomplish A?" Okay. Just like ChatGPT, it's only going to give you so much information, but probing is a skill, right? Being able to probe the other person because you uncover, right? Mark, I may ask you a question. You may say, "Hey, Chitra, the only thing you need to do to be able to do a podcast is, Zoom, StreamYard, XXX." Well, hey, Mark, what about this? What about that? Like it's being able to probe. And then the other person will say, "Oh, yeah, you know what? I tried this. It didn't work for me. Maybe it'll work for you." And you uncover additional elements. Now, you may say those additional elements may be marginal, but I disagree. Value is created on the margin. And many times in my own journey, a significant nugget came in the side comment, the margin comment that somebody made. And especially in collaboration and team in the workplace, in those moments where you pick up on the EQ, the subtle EQ can be very material, especially in high stakes environments where the players are highly nuanced individuals. So that comes from the interaction, the probing, the observing, the synthesizing and analyzing all that data you're ingesting, right? Because the observations of the person, how they react, the subtle facial expression, that can tell you volumes about the person. You may not be able to fully compute all of that in the moment, but over time, when you reflect, you're like, that nuance, it gave away something about the person.
Yeah, I wonder when you're in venture capital, uh, and statistically, only like 22% of venture capital funds return the actual investment. And it's something like 9% actually give a significant return. And I wonder why is that when you have such brilliant people or supposedly brilliant people with Harvard MBA and Wharton MBA educations and spent a lot of time in banking or whatever, and yet and they're only investing later down the road when the company already has significant revenue. Why is still the return so low? And how could your methodology be used to improve that hit rate?
I think great question, and three points to suggest, and my comment is about the entire industry. In the book, I was fortunate to interview 15 tremendous, amazing, distinguished global leaders, and one of them was Steve Krause, senior partner at Bessemer Venture Partners, who is a veteran in the industry. And one of the things that Steve said, so the first item is FOMO, fear of missing out, right? In the frenzy of the world. And by the way, this is not only true just for venture capital, but every industry on planet Earth. There can be a frenzy, a fear of missing out. Fear of missing out causes us to rush and make decisions, investment decisions, not do thorough diligence. And one of the things that Steve Krause talked about is yes, he does look at what other people, other investors do, but that does not drive or that is not a significant weight on his own investing and decision making. He is conscious about not making investment decisions based on FOMO, the fear of missing out. But that is something that drives all of us to rush and make a decision, not do the diligence. Related to that is the octagonulation point. In this age now of information where you don't know what's data perception manipulation, you can get a lot of information and make inappropriate evaluation decisions. So you're investing and making decision making based more on perception and manipulation. So are you looking under the covers? Do you have people on your team with the right literacy, frankly, with the right, and just because, by the way, Mark, you go to a business school doesn't mean you fundamentally understand a balance sheet, income statement, cash flows, and the data being put in front of you, because we are all in a swipe and like culture where for many of us, our hardcore analytical skills are eroded. And this is a comment for all people on the planet, right? Which is brand name schools, non-brand name schools, whatever it is, doesn't mean you've got the hardcore, deep probing, questioning, curiosity, analytical skills, and you're applying that in rigor at scale, because that ties to issue number one. If you're worried about fear of missing out, you may quickly be like, oh, I've not done enough diligence. I've done enough. I'm going to invest, right? And the third is false pattern recognition. Pattern recognition is a thing, but you have to, I would suggest, well, first of all, no one has to do anything, but what I would suggest is being very conscious about your pattern recognition, updating your pattern recognition, unlearning at times, right? And I interviewed John Corngold, the head of growth equity at Blackstone, for the book. And one of the things he talked about is, and he admitted this, which I so appreciated. One of the chapters in my book is Status Quo is Not Your Friend. And John said, he may have tremendous pattern recognition, go into a meeting, go into a board meeting and said, yep, he knows this. He's seen this movie before. And then he has to catch himself and humble himself, because you can't rely on your life to date pattern recognition. You've got to be willing to humble yourself to say, you know what, maybe I haven't seen this movie before, or just because this movie played out 9 out of 10 times doesn't mean it's going to play out the 10th time. It's your explicit process to break things apart and put things back together for you to really make the right assessment that you've got that you've got effective pattern recognition, and therefore decision making in that analysis to invest or not, or to get behind a founder or not.
By the way, we had Patrick McGinnis, who coined the term FOMO, on the show the first year because he had written a book as well. So interesting that you had mentioned him now. So in chapter 4, written and unwritten rules, you say most people think they're in the game, in quotations, when really they aren't. What are the earliest signs someone has been admitted into the real game?
So I'll give an example. When, and this is a large company, right? When I was in investment banking at a large bank, they may have town halls, which could be invite only. Are you invited to those meetings? Are you invited to the management conference? Are you invited to some of the inner circle? So in other words, do you have access to the information of what's really going on? Do you have access? Do you even know who the real decision makers are? And by the way, just because they have a fancy title or a senior title doesn't mean they're a person with substantive power, influence, and are in the know. So A, do you know who the key decision makers are? Do you have access to them? Are you building relationships with them? B, do you have access to the information, whether it's the meetings, the town halls, the management conferences, the internal reports? Do you have access to the real information of what's going on? Not just the management or town hall narrative, but how the company is really performing, what the customer really says, what your stakeholder really says. And number 3, do you have, tied to number 2, is the information on what it takes to really perform, be rewarded, get promoted, get paid, get new opportunities, even know what those opportunities are. So there's the level 1 or level 2 of who the inside people are, the inside information is, the inside opportunities are. And through that questioning process, navigation process, networking process in these large or small companies, you'll start to know that, are you on the outer perimeter or moving into the level 2 versus the inner circle, to have access as early as possible to those opportunities, relationships, business changes, team unit changes, people changes, and what's required to succeed.
Which unwritten rule do people break most often without realizing it, and what's the actual cost?
The EQ miss. I think EQ, and this is something I've had to learn the hard way because I came up through a school of merit. My mom and dad and my teachers were like, work hard, deliver, you're going to get rewarded. Not necessarily, right? Sometimes if you outperform your teammate or your boss, you may get thwarted because of their insecurity. And so
You're right about that.
the big thing is about the EQ of the situation, understanding the people you're dealing with. And frankly, there's 2 types of people broadly: the person who wants to win and the person who's afraid to lose. Now, you've read the book, so I won't ask you if you know the difference, because you may have remembered that from the book. But the difference is the person who wants to win, they're about winning. They're not about, oh, it's just only about Chitra, me, myself, and I. They're about collecting, contributing to the collective, the team, the company, whoever, because we are about winning. The person who's afraid to lose, they will cut their nose to spoil their face. They're relatively more insecure. They've got to win. Not about the team. If the team is going to look good, but they will look bad, they may thwart the situation. So that's why I say the EQ to understand, are you dealing with someone who wants to win versus someone who wants to lose? Because that sets the bedrock for understanding what are the real unwritten rules of this environment. How do you navigate around those types of people? And what does it take to really advance, contribute, and succeed?
Yeah, the Philadelphia Eagles had a quarterback like that got injured. He had an MVP type season, and then when he got knocked out with 3 games left, he was hoping the team would fail because he couldn't stand it if they succeeded without them, and they ultimately won the Super Bowl that year. But he was really cheering against him, and then the Eagles traded him.
And that's a really common thing and an important point, because the second element of that EQ, identifying does a person want to win versus lose, and again that could be relative as well, is back to an earlier point I made about the substance versus the form. Thoughts, words, actions, energy, is it aligned or is it not aligned? So for example, you're given the job, you're given a big job, but you're not given budget, you're not given autonomy. You're not given the right team. You're not equipped with the resources for you to succeed, right? The customer says they're going to buy, but you've got to chase them for 1, 2, 3, 5 years until they actually sign the contract, right? So another big tip off around the unwritten rules is actively monitoring. Does the substance match the form? Another example, especially since you mentioned teaching at the university there in Vietnam for students, right? Have you ever gone to a job interview, whether it's 30 or 60 minutes, and the person is like, oh, I'm going to leave all this question, leave time for you to ask questions. Next thing you know, you're down to the last 2 minutes. And it's like, oh, okay, what questions do you have?
Yeah.
That speaks to the culture of the organization. Now, it's one thing if the conversation is so rich and the person says, you know what, I'll make extra time. But that speaks a lot about the culture of the person and the organization, that when they say we're going to make time for questions, do they really care what your questions are? Do they really make sure they're consciously make time for questions? Or even if they run out of time, they may say, hey, I know we didn't have time for questions. Can we grab an extra 10 minutes now or tomorrow or whatever the case may be? But I use that as an example because often the thoughts, words, actions, energy are not aligned, and you as an individual or a team or a company may not be moving in the world looking that does a substance match the form. If the substance doesn't match the form, that's a problem. Step 2, is the gap solvable over time? Problem solvable. And do you want to try to solve it? Number 3, if you don't want to solve it or over time you try and it's not solvable, that is reflective of a more pervasive issue which will surface, which significant probability may not be in your favor.
In chapter 5, Pivots Part 1, when the siege comes, in this chapter, you describe both voluntary and involuntary pivots. What's the biggest mistake people make during an involuntary pivot?
This is a tough one, and I wouldn't say it's a mistake, but we're all human, and therefore it's fear. When that involuntary pivot comes, involuntary, that means it's not something you expected. Whether somebody else thwarted you, you lost your job, you or a loved one gets diagnosed with a critical health issue, you in a romantic relationship, somebody broke up with you and you didn't see it coming. All of these elements. So the word of involuntary is unexpected. You were not able to see it coming for whatever reason, or you ignored the signs, whatever the case may be. But in that moment, you may feel fear and loss. The emotion of loss, well, that's human. There's nothing you can do. Each one of us will process that emotion in our own way. But it's the fear that you can't get through it, the fear that you can't get on the other side, the fear that you can't come up with the steps. I may have written the Codebreaker Mindset, but there's times in my life where I might experience something involuntary, right? And you may feel that moment of fear because we're all human. So that's not so much a mistake, it's understanding. But here's the thing of muscle memory. Over time, what I've learned in my own journey, the more I've had to deal with involuntary pivots, I remind myself, oh, yeah, I was afraid. When I'm a survivor of domestic violence, I have an ex-husband. I had fear during that moment, but you know what? I got over that. I've lost a job in my life. I got over that. I didn't get that promotion. I got over that. So even now, today, you and I are talking. If the next involuntary pivot comes, because inevitably it's going to happen, right?
Yep.
Inevitably it will happen. I may feel a moment of fear, but the self-love message to myself is, Chitra, you've dealt with involuntary pivots before. You will deal with this and you will get through it. Take a moment, do what you need to do to love yourself, prop yourself up. Try not to dwell. Get your brain channeled, not on the fear, but your brain channeled on the problem solving.
What emotional skill is most essential when the siege hits someone professionally or personally? And explain what the siege means.
So the siege is what we were talking about a little bit, being thwarted. You're thwarted, right? The customer that you thought you were going to get the big deal with, it didn't work out. Macroeconomic or microeconomic headwind that blows up your business, right? For example, COVID was a headwind and a big siege to certain businesses. You're the boss who sponsored you leaves the organization and you're left all alone to fend for yourself, and it's a shark tank, right? These are examples of a siege or sieges, right? And so your question was, what's the skill? Remind me, please.
Oh, what's the skill?
No, so
Yeah.
that was just explaining the siege, but
Yeah.
the other part of the question is
Oh, someone professionally or personally, what emotional skill is most essential
the
when the
emotional
siege hits someone professionally or personally?
the emotional skill, and I'm going to summarize it in this phrase. The emotional skill is I'm a champ. What is I'm a champ, meaning champion? I'm a champ. What is the emotion behind that phrase, I'm a champ? I love myself. I believe in myself. I can do it. The siege, you thought you were going to take me out. You thought you were going to thwart me. Sure, maybe you've knocked me down today, but you know what? I can get back up. I'm going to do it. So I'm a champ summarizes I love myself. I can do it. I believe in myself. I'm going to get through this. I can. There's a lot of emotion, but summarized in I'm a champ.
In chapter 6, Pivots Part 2, Maneuvering the Intersections of Siege, you write that some pivots lead to intersections you couldn't have imagined. How can people better recognize when they've arrived at one of these intersections?
For me, what resonated with me, and perhaps this may resonate with others, is that it's an intersection and an opportunity of stretch. You're being exposed to a new industry, a new skill set, new skills and abilities and aptitudes in yourself are being developed, taken to the next level. You're tapping into aspects of who you are that you didn't even know exist. So sometimes the involuntary pivot can bring out so many positive things in you to make you a fuller human or professional, or enable you to develop other things about in yourself that perhaps were buried. And for example, when I became a TV news anchor, so I went to EY, as I mentioned, and I went to investment banking. But when I became a TV news anchor, I had forgotten that when I was a child, I was in my school newspaper. I had forgotten when I was a kid at undergrad at the University of Toronto, I was on the school radio, an editor of the university's yearbook at the Rotman School of Management at the University of Toronto. Now, being the editor of a yearbook is not the exact same thing as being a journalist, but there's parallels, right? Writing, pictures, putting a book together. Fast forward, here we are now. I'm an author of a USA Today bestseller, right? But there's parallels in the skills. So you may forget that there are aspects of who you are, Now I do work in sports advisory. I grew up playing sports, soccer, rugby, and so forth, swimming, skating. So there may be elements of who you are that are buried. So some of these involuntary pivots may unlock dormant interests and skills in you. Number two, give you the opportunity just to explore and develop net new. And three, stretch your horizon and forward thinking of the professions and the things that you can do in your life. I never thought when I started at EY that I would ever be a broadcast journalist, much less being a venture capital investor at a top tier firm, much less being an entrepreneur. Those were not things I had envisioned for myself. It was a more linear path, and the non-linearity allows you to, or can allow you to experience and develop and cultivate all the gifts that are in you.
Can you describe a time when following your pivot plan led to even a better outcome than the original goal?
Television. So here's the crazy thing about it. When I went to television after Deutsche Bank, everybody I knew, except for literally 5 people on the planet, thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life. The biggest professional mistake, economic mistake, because I took a massive pay cut to go on TV. You know, a lot of media. You know, you don't make money, or at least when you're early journalist, as I was at the time. And so they thought I was making the biggest mistake of my life that I wouldn't recover. So I go on television, enjoyed serving the audience through information, business information, got to do some sports and entertainment reporting, but a lot of business. So I enjoyed serving the audience. I come off TV, I go to digital transformation consulting at Genpact. However, fast forward, when I was having conversations with venture capital firms, they actually really appreciated the multimodal of my background and especially the TV. So I would say two things that I didn't realize were a benefit. Some people would talk to me when I was looking for new career opportunities and look at me like I was an alien because I had been multimodal and because I'd been on television. However, the venture capital sandbox appreciated the multimodality because they viewed that as a skill in terms of that holistic analytics that I mentioned when you've got multimodal thinking, multimodal pattern recognition, because that is a thing. But also they appreciated the TV aspect, the communication and marketing branding aspect to my journey, because a big part of venture capital and building companies is building their narratives. And so that was something that I didn't even fully realize would be extra additive in another sandbox, which is the venture capital sandbox. And definitely served me now in being able to write a book and hopefully when everyone reads it, efficient and effective use of the words and the language in the book to communicate thoughts.
In chapter 7, serendipity and informed intuition, many people struggle to trust their intuition. How do you distinguish between intuition from wishful thinking?
So and on that, before we get into that intuition versus wishful thinking, one of the things just to sort of full out or flush out for folks is, in the book, The CodeBreaker Mindset, I came up with this decision-making framework, which is the CodeBreaker Mindset equation, that there's written and unwritten rules times the pivots and all of that to the power of serendipity and informed intuition. So that's a framework that when you think about your own journey, anything you're trying to do personally, professionally, we've all had to figure out the written, but more importantly, unwritten rules. We've all had to pivot voluntarily or involuntarily, whether we realize it or not. And in our life, that nonlinear exponential tailwind, though it could be a headwind as well, but hopefully more a tailwind, is serendipity and informed intuition. So informed intuition, as I mentioned earlier, is that raw pattern recognition plus your life to date, the raw intuition you're born with, plus the life to date pattern recognition. And so intuition is that still moment, listening to yourself. And what does your inner voice tell you over and over and over? And if you have difficulty getting into clarity on that, some of the tools that I've used in my journey is meditation, yoga, dealing with interacting with a coach, and not so much a life coach, but a coach that helped me tap into my intuition, but very much also journaling, writing down. And here's the journaling process. writing down every day, what's the positive attribute you observe in yourself? What are the thoughts that come to yourself? What is the thinking that you have? What's the gratitude that you have? And over time, you're going to see a consistent pattern. And that pattern ties to your intuition, right? So from a young age, my intuition told me as a child that I was meant to help others. And that has stayed with me throughout. So through my own journaling, through my own life process, through my own way of how I show up in the world, I've seen a consistent theme around how I show up in a work setting, journalism, writing this book to help others, proceeds going to cancer research. So that was something consistent. But I remember as a child, like less than 10 years old, this calling that I want to help people. So that wasn't just wishful thinking, that was intuition. But by the way, Marc, wishful thinking, there's nothing wrong with that. Wishful thinking, especially if it's positive, let that be a tailwind. That may help you unlock your intuition. Or recurring wishful thinking, right? Recurring wishful thinking. Hey, I want to write a book. Well, I wanted to write a book a long time ago. Some people could have said that was wishful thinking. For me, it was intuition. But yeah, sure, there's some wishful thinking there. Me wanting to become a journalist and a TV, I felt I had a calling for that. But sure, you could say that that was wishful thinking, especially breaking into television in New York City. That was impossible. Everybody thought that that was a long shot. That was wishful thinking. So, you know what? The wishful thinking can be a positive. What makes wishful thinking actionable or not is if there's a pathway to get there, right? So, you know what, Marc? I'll share this because I spent some time a couple of weeks ago with some NASA folks who came to hear a talk on the Codebreaker Mindset, and I shared with them after seeing Artemis and the Orion go beyond the moon, I want to go into space. That's wishful thinking, but it's something that's been that's been coming back to me over and over. Will there be a window before I come off the planet for programs for a mere mortal civilian like myself, meaning I'm not a trained astronaut and I don't have a PhD in aeronautical engineering? But you know what the folks from NASA said to me? It's possible. So that's wishful thinking, right? Will I get to go into the solar system and off planet Earth? But is it really, right? You know, now perhaps me winning the gold medal in the 100-meter dash, that's probably wishful thinking. You see what I'm saying? So just to give some scenarios about wishful thinking that could be tied to your intuition and possible versus wishful thinking, which might, truly be out there.
Chitra, the time went so fast, an hour's gone. And I so enjoyed talking to you and listening to you talk about your book and your own experiences. And the book is a quick read in the sense that once you lock in, you just want to keep reading the book. So, again, congratulations on becoming a US Today bestseller. And I appreciate you coming on our show. And I hope to see all of you next week as well. Have a great day and a great weekend, everybody.
I was going to say, Marc, thank you so much for having me. And to everyone out there, please tap in with me on social media at Chitra Nawbatt, chitranawbatt.com. And please grab your hard copy of the Codebreaker Mindset on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, proceeds to cancer research. And with your support, let's help everybody out there through the Codebreaker Mindset. Thank you so much.
Thank you.